Sarada was a high school student stuck in the monotony of life. He constantly blamed others for his boredom. One morning, he woke up to a less than ideal start. His face was planted squarely against a cat's rear end. Apparently, he'd fallen asleep under his desk after gaming all night. To make matters worse, when he threw off his blanket, he was greeted by the sight of a woman's backside on his bed. On the wall of his room hung the bold declaration of his life goal: to escape Sakura-so, the dormitory he currently lived in. The woman sleeping there was Misaki, the occupant of the neighboring room. When she woke up, she exclaimed that she wanted to get married someday and started acting out a mock married couple morning routine with Sarada. Misaki then invited him to play a game, but Sarada reminded her that they had school to attend. Begrudgingly, she left his room. As Sarada stepped out of his room, he was called by Chihiro, the eccentric art teacher supervising Sakura-so. Her attire startled him. It was far from professional. Chihiro mentioned that today was the entrance ceremony for new students, which meant plenty of parents would be visiting. She cheekily admitted she was on the lookout for handsome single dads. She tossed Sarada a toolbox, instructing him to fix Sakura-so's signboard. While Sarada worked on the repairs, some passing students mocked the dorm, calling it a place for problem kids at Sui High School. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Sakura-so was a dormitory for students with unique circumstances, all part of Sui High's affiliated Sumi University of the Arts. Misaki suddenly shouted something ridiculous about being beautiful while solidifying Sarada's opinion that Sakura-so was more like a mental asylum than a dorm. Sakura-so housed a small, eclectic group of residents. Room 201 belonged to Misaki, a third-year art student. Misaki was a prolific creator. She wrote scripts, painted, edited, and all her anime works were officially licensed. That morning, she caused a scene outside by yelling something absurd about a journey of worldly desires. Room 103 was occupied by Jin Mitaka, who wrote the scripts for Misaki's anime. A third-year student in the education department, Jin had a personality that screamed playboy. Despite still being in high school, he acted like a suave kingpin juggling multiple relationships. Returning from a date, he boldly listed his upcoming rendezvous, including an encounter with a married woman fresh off her honeymoon. The dorm also housed Chihiro Sengoku in room 202, the aforementioned art teacher and Sakura-so's supervisor. At 30 years old, she was desperate to find a partner. Meanwhile, room 102 was home to Ryunosuke Akasaka, a second-year education student and a programming prodigy. He worked for a major company and communicated with the world through Maid-chan, an AI email responder he created. Room 101 was Sarada's. Nothing particularly noteworthy about him. Just a guy hoping to leave the chaos of Sakura-so behind. That morning, Chihiro announced she was heading out and reminded Sarada to meet her in the faculty room later. She also warned him not to be late for school, conveniently ignoring the fact that she'd already delayed him by making him fix the sign. Meanwhile, Misaki was still loudly teasing Sarada about becoming Chihiro's partner if she failed to find a boyfriend. That chaotic morning only deepened Sarada's desire to leave Sakura-so for good. The Sumi University-affiliated high school was divided into two departments, the Education Department and the Arts Department. The Arts Department was further split into two branches, Music and Fine Arts. Sarada Kanda rested his head on his desk, exhausted. Daiichi Miyahara approached him, commenting on how gloomy Sarada's life had become since moving in with such an exhausting group of oddballs. He also asked Sarada how long he planned to stay there. Shortly after, Nanami Oyama joined the conversation, reminding Sarada that he needed to leave Sakura-so as soon as possible. The reason Sarada had been moved from the regular dorms to Sakura-so stemmed from an incident involving a stray kitten. He had found the kitten, Hikari, and decided to care for it in his room until he could find its owner, despite the dorm's strict no-pet policy. Initially, he kept it hidden, but when the school discovered the cat, they gave him two choices: get rid of the cat or move to Sakura-so. Sarada chose to move to Sakura-so. Before he could find Hikari's owner, Sarada stumbled upon 6 more stray kittens abandoned in a box. Unable to leave them behind, he brought them to Sakura-so as well. Miyahara joked that Sarada might be cursed, but Sarada didn't care. Whether it was a curse or not, he simply couldn't ignore a helpless animal. Oyama smiled at Sarada's frustration, calling him too kind. She reminded him that if he truly wanted to leave Sakura-so, he needed to change his ways. Handing him a pack of fish-shaped cat treats from the shop where she worked part-time, she explained it was for his cats. Sarada admired Oyama's resilience. She had come to Tokyo alone from Osaka and worked tirelessly to support her education. She took part-time jobs, attended classes, voiced characters in Masaki Kamigusa's anime, and seized every opportunity for valuable experience. Unlike Misaki, who had natural talent, Oyama had to work hard for everything. During lunch, Sarada went to the faculty room to inform Chihiro Sengoku that he had finished fixing the Sakura-so signboard. He asked her about the entrance ceremony for new students. Chihiro, disappointed, told him she hadn't met any handsome single dads but had chatted with a few married men. Sarada, shocked, asked if she had any shame as a teacher. Chihiro nonchalantly replied that she had left her shame behind in her father's testicles. The entire faculty room froze in shock. It was the first time Sarada had heard a woman casually mention testicles. Chihiro then showed him a photo of a girl and explained that her cousin, Mashiro Shino, was transferring to Sakura-so. She was from England, and Chihiro asked Sarada to pick her up at the station at 6 p.m. When Sarada arrived at the station, a few street vendors greeted him, trying to sell their goods. One bread vendor commented on how tough Sarada's life must be and suggested he should stick with his family. Her husband interjected, saying Sarada should follow his ambitions instead. Sarada sat down beneath a street lamp, staring at his bread and reflecting on the vendor's advice. Maybe he really should just stay with his family. A falling sakura petal landed on his bread, but as he reached for it, the petal drifted away, carried by the wind to a sakura tree across the street. There under the tree sat a girl. Sarada approached her. She looked up and asked, "What color do you want to be?" Confused, Sarada replied he hadn't thought about it, maybe something multicolored. Then he asked her the same question. She answered, "White." Sarada pointed out that her answer matched her name, Mashiro, since Shiro Japanese means white. Sarada introduced himself and showed her the photo Chihiro had given him. It appeared to be an older picture, as the girl in front of him looked 3 years older than the one in the photo. Still, Sarada recognized her. Mashiro said Sarada's name was beautiful and that she liked it. When Mashiro Shina arrived at Sakura-so, everyone welcomed her warmly. They celebrated with a dinner party featuring tuna stew. Misaki Kamegusa, ever enthusiastic, started feeding Mashiro some vegetables from the stew, warning her to be careful because the liquid might drip and burn her. Sarada Kanda immediately stopped her, knowing full well that Misaki probably had something indecent in mind. He didn't want them teasing Mashiro, inappropriate jokes. Mashiro was set to join the arts department as a second-year student at Sumai High School. Ji Mitaka, leaning over to Sarada, whispered an analysis of Mashiro's body, her height 162 centimeters, her weight 45 kilograms, and with astonishing detail the proportions of her figure. He noted that while Mashiro might appear slender, her curves were in fact quite pronounced. Sarada felt utterly embarrassed by Jin's blunt and vulgar comments. Misaki then presented an animation she had created to welcome Mashiro. While the visuals were impressive, the dialogue and tone didn't match at all. Sarada praised her technical skill, but Jin pointed out a flaw, critiquing the timing of the final explosion and suggesting it should have been slowed down. Despite their constant joking around, Misaki and Jin grew serious whenever they discussed animation. Meanwhile, Mashiro quietly observed Sarada's face. Later that night, back in his room, Sarada couldn't stop thinking about the way Mashiro had looked at him. He felt like she thought he was a failure. Compared to Mashiro, who was clearly talented in the arts, Sarada considered himself ordinary. As he sat with Hikari, his beloved white cat, he reflected on how dull his life had been before he moved to Sakura-so. Ever since he found Hikari and made the move, his life had become a little less mundane. The next morning, as always, Jin and Misaki filled the air with their playful banter. Sarada fed his cats and then asked Chihiro Sengoku why Mashiro wasn't staying in the regular dorms. Chihiro vaguely replied that Sakura-so was the most suitable place for her. She also made Sarada promise to look after Mashiro on her first day of school. Chihiro's insistence and tone made Sarada a little uneasy, but he agreed and assured her he would guide Mashiro to school. When Sarada went upstairs to call Mashiro, he ignored the sign warning that it was a girls-only area, telling himself it was part of his duty. Standing outside her door, he called her name but got no response. After knocking and waiting, he cautiously opened the door and was stunned. Mashiro's room was in complete chaos, with clothes and belongings scattered everywhere. For a moment, Sarada thought a thief had ransacked the place. As he looked around, he noticed her computer was still on, displaying pages of a manga she had drawn. The story seemed to follow a straightforward plot about a boy and a girl without any dramatic twists or love rivals. Suddenly, something moved under the desk, and Sarada fell back in surprise. It was Mashiro, curled up under the desk and wrapped in a blanket, fast asleep. Sarada gently woke her up. Mashiro emerged from the blanket and stood before him, completely naked. Sarada froze in shock and immediately demanded to know why she wasn't wearing any clothes. Mashiro simply replied that she didn't know. She explained that after taking a bath, she couldn't decide what to wear, which was why her room was such a mess. Mortified, Sarada quickly grabbed her school uniform and tossed it to her. Mashiro put on the shirt and declared she was ready. However, when she turned around, Sarada noticed she wasn't wearing any underwear. Flustered, he asked her why, and again she casually said she didn't know which ones to wear. Sarada sighed, handed her the appropriate items and told her to finish getting dressed. After Mashiro finally got ready, Sarada told her to wash her face. She did, but in the process soaked her shirt, making it almost transparent. Sarada, now red-faced and on the verge of losing his patience, instructed her to put on her bra and blazer. As he mopped the wet floor, he grumbled about why Chihiro had dumped such a clueless girl on him. Out of nowhere, Mashiro said, "You're an interesting person." Her unexpected compliment caught Sarada off guard, making him smile. He ended up helping Mashiro with everything, combing her hair, putting on her socks, and even tying her shoes. Then he grabbed her hand and started running, determined to make it to school on time. Sarada thought back to how his life had changed. During the summer, he had picked up a stray kitten and moved into Sakuraso. Now in the spring, he had met this innocent and unpredictable girl. Life was far from boring anymore. This morning, the residents of Sakuraso gathered at the dining table, where Sarada invited them to discuss how to address the rumors circulating about the Sakuraso residents. The rumor concerned Mashiro, a young girl. Sarada explained that earlier that morning, he had to help her put on socks, tidy her hair, and even guide her to school because she got lost on the way. As a result, it didn't arrive until the second period. Sarada pointed out that Mashiro was a bit special and unable to take care of herself like most people. Therefore, he proposed that everyone in Sakuraso should come up with a plan to take care of Mashiro. However, no one responded positively. Chihiro even commented that Mashiro's parents likely needed a caretaker for her, which was why Mashiro was placed under Chihiro's supervision at Sakuraso. While Sarada noticed Mashiro's face was messy from eating snacks, he hurriedly cleaned it. The residents then unanimously decided to assign Sarada the full responsibility of taking care of Mashiro. Even Ryunosuke, who had no time to bother with the issue, was considered to agree by default. The meeting ended abruptly, leaving Sarada with no chance to argue against the decision. Mashiro innocently called Sarada by his name, saying she hoped they could become closer. That morning, Mashiro was assigned to cook. While retrieving cabbage, she glanced at the chores board and noticed her name was now assigned an additional task, taking care of all of her own needs. Misaki arrived to cheer Sarada on, but he found the assignment burdensome and even declared that he might leave Sakuraso soon. Before he could explain why, Mashiro appeared wearing only a shirt without any underwear. Flustered, Sarada scolded her, asking if she was deliberately trying to show off. Mashiro replied naively that Misaki had told her Sarada would like her better if she didn't wear underwear. Misaki confirmed this, prompting Sarada to lash out at her for not understanding how difficult it was for him to take care of Mashiro. Sarada sent Mashiro back to her room to get dressed, deciding he'd skip breakfast and just grab something at the store later. Meanwhile, Jin was still in his room with a nurse he was dating, role-playing as doctor and patient on the bed. Such was the chaotic start to another day at Sakuraso. At the store, Sarada was checking his wallet, calculating if he had enough money to buy a salad. Mashiro, however, was already engrossed in eating a baumkuchen, completely ignoring the fact that it hadn't been paid for. Frustrated, Sarada questioned what Mashiro thought she was doing all this time. Mashiro replied simply and repeatedly that she just painted pictures. Suddenly, Sarada noticed Aoyama, who was preparing to head to school after finishing her part-time shift. This store was where she worked. Sarada apologized to Aoyama for Mashiro's behavior, explaining that she had eaten 2 baumkuchen without paying. He then introduced Mashiro to Aoyama, mentioning that Mashiro also lived at Sakuraso. Aoyama assumed that Sarada and Mashiro must be quite close, to which Mashiro innocently agreed, saying that Sarada was her first man and she was happy he was. Mashiro's candid remark led Aoyama to believe that Sarada had some kind of indecent relationship with Mashiro, causing her to run away in shock. Mashiro, however, had meant that Sarada was her first male friend, as she had only ever had female friends in England. Sarada could only lament the misunderstanding, wishing Mashiro had clarified before Aoyama ran off, as this situation was bound to lead to more rumors. During lunch break, Miyahara asked Aoyama if she had seen Sarada, but Aoyama replied that she hadn't, her tone sounding disgusted at the mere mention of his name. Miyahara assumed that Sarada must have done something troublesome again. Meanwhile, Chihiro spotted Sarada drinking from a water fountain. He couldn't afford to buy bread since he had spent all his money on Mashiro's baumkuchen that morning. To stave off his hunger, Sarada was relying on water. Frustrated, Sarada blamed Mashiro for his empty wallet and demanded compensation from Chihiro. However, Chihiro cleverly changed the subject by asking about his future aspirations survey. She urged Sarada to fill it out, emphasizing that it wasn't something to overthink. Before Sarada could push the topic back to Mashiro, Chihiro walked away, effectively ending the conversation. Later in class, Miyahara approached Sarada to share some news about Misaki and Jean. A magazine had featured an article on them, describing them as a genius duo who had been friends since childhood. The magazine also praised Misaki as an extraordinary high school girl. Suddenly, Mashiro entered the classroom looking for Sarada. Her presence immediately captivated the students, who admired her cuteness. Mashiro announced that she could go home alone today, but Sarada, worried about her safety, initially refused. Realizing that his classmates were eavesdropping, he reluctantly gave her permission but warned her to be careful and not eat anything without paying for it. After Mashiro left, Miyahara approached Sarada again, curious about who the cute girl was and teasing him about playing around with girls without telling him. Sarada denied it, explaining that Mashiro wasn't normal. He also noticed Aoyama turning away from him, still upset about the misunderstanding earlier that morning. Sarada then spotted Mashiro walking with Ayano. The two were heading to the store where Aoyama worked part-time, as Ayano's car was still in the shop. At the store, Mashiro approached Aoyama, explaining that in England, she had only had female friends and Sarada was her first male friend. She added that Sarada had asked her to clarify this misunderstanding. Embarrassed, Aoyama realized the whole situation had been a big misunderstanding and didn't know how to face Sarada later. Aoyama offered Mashiro a bonkuchen, but Mashiro declined even though she loved it. She remembered Sarada's warning about not eating anything without paying for it. Ayano then bought the bonkuchen for Mashiro and the two enjoyed it together. Aoyama felt relieved, her smile returning now that the misunderstanding was cleared. Meanwhile, Sarada had returned to Sakuraso, still worrying about whether Mashiro could make it home safely. Hikari the white cat greeted Sarada warmly, which lifted his spirits. However, he soon noticed a trail of cabbages leading to Jean's room, like some kind of cabbage pathway to glory. Jean appeared, explaining that today was his birthday and immediately guessed who was behind this peculiar setup. Of course, it was Misaki. Last year, Misaki had celebrated his birthday by covering herself in whipped cream and waiting for him in his room. This year, for some reason, she had chosen cabbages. When they opened Jean's room, they were stunned to find the entire space decorated with cabbages. In the center of the room was a large gift box. Sarada tried to excuse himself, but Jean pulled him back, refusing to open the mysterious box alone. Sarada assured him that the box wasn't likely to explode. Suddenly, the box moved and Misaki emerged, wrapped in a long ribbon, looking incredibly seductive. Jean tried to dodge her, but Sarada ended up falling and getting pinned under Misaki. Misaki then turned her attention to Jean, attempting to hug him. Jean quickly wrapped her in a blanket and told her to get dressed. Misaki protested, explaining that she had really tried her best to make this happen. Sarada dashed back to his room, leaving Jean to fend off Misaki's antics. Such was life at Sakuraso. If Sarada didn't escape these chaotic situations, he felt like he'd eventually lose his mind. Once inside, Sarada picked up a magazine featuring an article about a successful game developer. It reminded him of the importance of pursuing dreams. Motivated, he opened his computer to contact Ryunosuke, only to find a message from Maid-chan, the AI assistant, saying that Ryunosuke was currently taking his scheduled 8-hour rest. Before Sarada could respond, Mashiro showed up at his door, asking him to come to her room. Once there, she made an unexpected request. She wanted him to take off his clothes. Shocked and flustered, Sarada adamantly refused, saying it was embarrassing. Mashiro then explained her reasoning. Last year, she had participated in a manga contest, but failed. Ayano, impressed by her artwork, had given her advice. Instead of focusing on detailed facial expressions, which was difficult for Mashiro, she should try drawing something impactful. Inspired by this, Mashiro decided she wanted to draw a naked man for her manga. After much resistance, Sarada finally gave in, albeit reluctantly. He sat on Mashiro's bed, and she approached him, observing and even touching his body. She remarked on his rapid heartbeat and suddenly asked him to hold her tightly. Then she asked Sarada if he had ever had sex, to which he vehemently denied it. Mashiro complimented Sarada's physique, and he explained it was because he used to play soccer from grade school through middle school. He clarified that he no longer played, which led Mashiro to assume he had quit due to an injury. Sarada corrected her, saying he had stopped because he no longer had the passion for it. After 9 years of playing, he felt like he had reached his limit and realized he wasn't even upset when his team lost. As Mashiro continued sketching, Sarada noticed a draft of her manga. Ayano had critiqued it, saying it lacked excitement, but Mashiro was determined to improve and was enthusiastic about entering another contest. When Sarada tried to put his clothes back on, Mashiro stopped him, declaring they wouldn't sleep that night and would instead continue working on the manga. The next morning, Misaki teased Sarada about having fun all night, which Sarada quickly denied. He then asked if Jean had eaten the cabbages from the day before, but before Misaki could answer, Sarada escaped outside to take out the trash. He still couldn't figure out the dynamic between Jean and Misaki. It baffled him completely. On his way back, Sarada ran into Aoyama, who was heading to work. He noticed that her accent, which became more pronounced when she was angry, had softened, indicating that she was no longer upset with him. Aoyama changed the subject, asking about Mashiro, whom she found a bit odd. Sarada explained that Mashiro was passionate about drawing manga. While her artwork was excellent, her storytelling needed improvement, but she kept working hard and Sarada couldn't help but cheer her on. He then compared Mashiro to Aoyama, praising her for working so diligently before school. Aoyama, embarrassed, smiled and headed off to work. Sarada reflected on how incredible everyone around him was. Aoyama and Mashiro knew exactly what they wanted to do, while Jean and Misaki excelled in their own fields. Compared to them, Sarada felt like he was nothing. He hoped that someday he could figure out what he truly wanted to do. Back at Sakuraso, Sarada noticed a drawing in a book and commented on how beautiful it was. Suddenly, Mashiro thanked him. Confused, Sarada asked why she was thanking him. Mashiro explained that she had drawn it. Startled, Sarada asked Jean about the book and Jean pointed out its cover. Sarada looked closely and saw the name Shina Mashiro. Shocked, he realized he had no idea who Mashiro really was. Chihiro had never mentioned her, and Sarada hadn't seen her name on TV or in magazines. He immediately searched her name online and was stunned by the results. Shina Mashiro was renowned as a genius in the modern art world. Articles praised her as an exceptional artist, and there were even exhibitions dedicated to her work. Sarada realized that Mashiro was a famous painter, and her achievements far surpassed anything Jean, Misaki, or even he himself could dream of doing.